of our questions is someone who's kind of asking like, okay, so what do you say when someone asks you to condemn? I have a I have an answer, and then you can grade it. You can evaluate. You two professors can evaluate my answer
Sure. Go ahead.
based on what you've said. Okay. So someone says, Jonathan Brown, do you condemn X? And I say, what you're really asking is if I belong. I do belong, and you don't have the power to ask me that. You don't have the power to question that. Is that a bad answer? And then just stay quiet, literally. And if they even if they keep trying to ask you a question, just stay quiet. Don't say anything until they change the subject. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely in the range of answers that you could give. I mean, we had this conversation, I think it was yesterday, Tarek and I, with kind of a close group of people about this topic as well. And I think you have to check the intention. Like when you're having a conversation with somebody, you know in your heart of heart whether or not somebody's coming to you sincerely as a well-wisher, or if the question has a demand that's built in it, that's rhetorical, as we've mentioned before. And when you know that it's rhetorical, that they're not really interested, they just want to show you up, they just want to put you in your place, in that moment, I think the kind of response that you've given is appropriate. You know, like you could have different formulations of that. You could say, well, why is that question so important to you? What is it about me that gave you the impression that this is something that I condone in some way? Now they're in a situation, right? Because they're only the only place that they can go to is, well, you know, you share a faith with this guy, right? And so then the next question, of course, is, well, why would you connect one person, you know, who's an individual from within 1.7 billion people with the entirety of the faith that these people practice? You know, and that rabbit hole gets to, well, because I'm a racist, basically. Right? Like there's no place of refuge.
What is it about me that would make you ask that question? That's a very good. You can say because you look a certain way, because you belong to, and then you can just. That's a great response.
I mean, like, they've got no place of refuge once you ask that question. They have to admit. And I remember I was stopped by the police one day, and so at the port in the UK, they can stop you under what's known as Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act 2000. And you are obliged to answer their questions, or otherwise you have committed an act of terrorism. If you refuse to answer a question, you are convicted for being a terrorist. You're charged and then prosecuted for being a terrorist. So they asked me how many times a day I pray and whether or not I pray at the masjid. And of course, like, you know, I have to answer their question. Well, technically I'm supposed to. So instead what I did is that they give you a leaflet which explains the legislation they stop you under. I said, this legislation says that, you know, you're allowed to stop me in order to question about whether or not I've been involved in the instigation, preparation, or commission of an act of terrorism. Now, I will answer your question, but I want you to explain to me why a question about my practice of my faith is important to what your power to stop me under is about. Like, how does that connect to me being involved in the commission, preparation, or instigation of an act of terrorism? And then, of course, they start flustering because there's only one place left for them to go, which is, well, because we believe that Muslims are linked to terrorism, like in a ubiquitous way. So that's where they finish up every single time, because they have to, or they try and, like, you know, kind of fiddle about, and nearly always they never finish asking the question. They will move on to the next one. Alhamdulillah, I've never had to answer that question because they always felt too uncomfortable to continue with it, you know. And so I think it's important that we question the questioner in these circumstances. It should be part of our arsenal in the way that we respond to people who make demands of us when they believe they have a sense of power or control in those conversations.
I mean, I can ask a question. Okay, so sorry, I don't want to talk too much. Okay, so you know, like, I'm not a very brave person, you know. So, and when you get the power of the state directed at you, like at a airport, you know, or a police officer, I mean, for me, it's terrifying. You know, it's terrifying. do you get used to that? Does it get easier? Is there any dua you say that, or something that you remember that helps you deal with these things? Either you or Dr. Tarek. I know both you dealt with these kind of things.
I mean, I went to it from Tarek as well, but I mean, the Dua of Musa, every single time I go into these conversations, every single time I give a presentation, the one time I truly tanked an interview, I know for a fact that I forgot to recite the Dua of Musa beforehand. I felt the loss of it as I was fumbling. You know, I was tired. I wasn't in the right state of mind when I went into the interview, and I tanked it completely. And, you know, and not drawing on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beforehand, really, it felt to me like a loss, you know, as I was then like getting more and more stuck. So that's a huge part of it. You know, like our deen gives us izzah, you know, alhamdulillah, like, and being in those kinds of situations, it's always hard. Like, don't ever let anybody say to you, like, if you have enough iman, you will always get past these things, right? Yeah, of course. But like Musa alayhi salam felt fearful. You know, he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for support. He said, give me my brother. Like, you know, like imagine any of us were asked, like, just roll up to the White House and, tell the president to just, kind of like stop all of his oppression, right? It's a hard thing to do in the way that Musa alayhi salam was asked to do it, right? And so we have these normal human instincts that we shouldn't simply just ignore and forget. I think it's important we recognize that it is fearful to be doing this work, to be in this environment, to be in this field. Sister Layla's whole family have really shown us an amazing example of how you stand up for yourselves righteously. Dr. Sami is such a hero for so many of us, because these prisoners, they lead a pathway for the rest of us to see, to be able to stick to our morals and our values. And I think that's really what Islam gives us in these moments. But yeah, I'd like to hear from Tariq about this as well, actually.
MashaAllah, you, I think you covered the answer awesome. But I mean, I'll just sort of affirm everything you just said, MashaAllah. I think there's an element, I think we have to admit to our fears. I think that's the thing that we perhaps might not be doing, and I think for me, and I'm really not the best person to ask, because I mean, that's the whole point of the chapter that I wrote, which is the fact that there's sort of this point of recognition where I have to admit that I'm a coward. And now I have to sort of learn that bravery. That's also what I teach my children, right? When they're afraid, I want them to feel that fear, because that's when you learn to be brave. That's when you learn to be courageous. But you have to also recognize what that fear is. I think for me, speaking out or whatever it might be, I feel like I have to really just sit down and come to terms. What is my worst fear? I think for me, one of my worst fears is to be separated from my children. So I have to really sit down with that thought. I can't run away from that thought. What would it mean to me to speak the truth to the point that I would be separated from my children? And that's a very, very powerful thought. And the moment I run away from that, I'm no longer confronting myself. You see, then in that moment, I'm not going to be prepared to speak the truth should I have to. And I think there's an existential reason why Allah created us with these emotions. Every emotion serves a purpose. And fear is a way of sort of recognizing, it brings you back, to sort of coming to terms with your mortality, with finality, that someone might pass away, that you might pass away, you might leave your children alone. But these are things we actually have to confront anyway. Right? So that fear is actually a blessing, is that it sort of puts us in a situation where now we have to confront it. This is sort of an existential reality of the world that had we not been in the situation, we probably wouldn't have confronted, right? I'm not saying it's ever going to be easy. I think that's the challenge of it. It'd be like, okay, Ya Allah, I'm so scared of ever being separated from my children. But, scared as I am of this thought, I leave it to you that if I ever do this and I speak the truth, that you'll take care of them and that you unite us in Jannah, and it's not easy, you know, and I think there's a challenge there. But also, you know, if I may actually, you know, we're talking about always reversing questions here. I'm gonna reverse the question back on you, because the whole point and the issue is just that you said, well, what happens if I get caught up in the question? But I think that's inherently the problem that I think we're at. And I think that reflects far more the reality of modernity, that we do think in eyes. When you get caught, you're not caught, we're caught, right? If it wasn't you, it would have been someone else. You know, if it wasn't me, it would have been my daughter. It would have been my son eventually. So when any one of us gets caught, we're all caught. And that's the thing that we need to always remember, is that, you know, like in the end, we are a community. There is a community. There's a sense that, okay, I'm being confronted in a certain situation, but I know that even though I'm by myself, I'm not alone. There are, you know, besides obviously our relationship to Allah, I actually mean in a very material way, you know, I know that worst comes to worst, there's gonna be people out there to support me. You know, there's gonna be lawyers, there's gonna be Cage, you know, there's gonna be you know, every single organization that that in existence, you know, by Allah's will and mercy, it will come to support me if I speak the truth, right? And I think there's an element there where everything in the system wants us to feel alone in these situations. Everything is built to make us feel insecure. And inherently, the moment you feel like you're alone, you're lost at that point. You know, that's the rabbit hole. But you know, we need to always remember that we're always part of a community, and I think that's also the challenge, is to not to think in eyes.